So as I mentioned in the last video, there are three types of errors that might be created by Mongoose and which we need to mark as operational errors, so that we can then send back meaningful error messages to clients in production. And let's now start by simulating these three errors. Okay, so the first one is when we try an invalid ID here. So simply something like this. And so Mongoose will not be able to convert this into a MongoDB ID. Remember that. And so this is the error that we get right now. And actually here you can see all the kind of stuff that we defined we wanted to see in productions. So the entire error object, then the error message, and also the complete stack. Okay, and so this is a perfect example of an operational error. So this is something that might very well happen, and so we need to send back a meaningful response in order to handle this error. And this is a perfect example of an operational error that is very likely to at some point happen to a client. And so we need to handle it as one, all right? So basically by sending a nice error message instead of something like this, which doesn't mean anything to any client, right? Okay, so the goal here again will be to basically mark this error as operational and create a meaningful message, all right? But before we can do that, let's take a look at the other two Mongoose errors that we also will have to mark as operational, okay? So let's create a new tour, and what I'm gonna do is to create a duplicate name. So let's just copy this one here. And I think all the values here are correct. So let's try this now. And indeed, here we get the error that we already know, which is duplicate key error, because we already have a tour or a document with the name of Forest Hiker. Okay, so again, this is an error that is going to happen at some point. And again, it doesn't have a very meaningful error message, right? And so again, we need to change that. Then the third one is also kind of about validation. And so let's do that here in update tour. So let's say that we want to have a ratings average of 6, which we know is invalid, right? Because we said that the max of ratings average could be 5. So let's see. And indeed, we get this validation error, right? So it's called a validation error, and it has this errors object with all the errors. Let's actually put another one here. So let's say difficulty, and then something else. So one that's not easy, medium, or difficult. And so now we get these two objects here. One's for the ratings and one for the difficulty. All right. So these are the three errors that we're going to mark as operational, starting with this first one. So basically the cast error type. Okay. So let's go back here, and we're going to do that here. Again, because we only want to do this in production. Okay, in development, we don't care about any of this. All we want to do is to see our errors so that we can basically fix them. But in production, this is where we want to send the meaningful error messages to the client. So let's say if error.name is equal to cast error. And so that's how we're going to identify this type of error here that we just talked about, because it has the name of cast error, all right? So if error.name is cast error, well, then we're gonna call a special function that we're gonna create in a second, which is called handle cast error. And then I'm also gonna say here DB for database, so that we know that this is related to our database, okay? And this is how it's gonna work. We're gonna pass the error that Mongoose created into this function. So just like this. And this will then return a new error created with our app error class. Okay, and that error will then be marked as operational, because remember, all our app errors have the isOperational property set to true automatically, right? So this will return an error. And so let's save that. Okay, and so we're saving that in error. Now, it's not a good practice at all to override the arguments of a function. Okay, so error comes from this middleware function, right? So from here. And so instead of doing that, I will actually create a hard copy of that error object. Okay, so let, and I'm using let and not const because we will of course reassign a new error then later here. So let's call this one error instead of just err, which is the normal name of errors in Express. And so again, we're going to use our trick where we use destructuring of the original error. Okay? And so from now on, we will use this error instead of error. So here, and here, and here. All right? And so let's now go ahead and actually create this function here. So let's put that up here right in the beginning. All right. And remember that this receives an error. And now I'm going back to just calling it error like this, because again, that's kind of the standard in Express. And to start, let's take a look again at our error object here. Okay. So here we have the path and we have also the value. Okay. So the path here is basically the name of the field for which the input data is in the wrong format. Okay. And that value here is then this one, which is of course the one that we passed in. All right. So this might not only happen for the ID, but really for any field that we query for with a value in the wrong format. All right. And so let's now basically create a string that says that we have an invalid ID with the value of this one in this case. All right. So it's path and value. Okay. So let's create a message here and say invalid error dot path is error dot value. Okay. And so now we simply return our own app error. Okay, so just like I mentioned a couple of times by now. Okay, so app error, and I actually have to include it here, or to require, because I didn't do it yet. So const app error is equal to require, move one level up, then into the utilities folder, and then the app error. Here it is. And so now into our app error, we pass in our message and the 400 status code, which stands for bad request. Okay, and so just like this, we transformed the weird error that we were getting from Mongoose into an operational error with a nice friendly message that an actual human can read. All right, okay. One last thing that we need to change here is to also set this one here to error. Okay. And so right now, if our error is cast error, well, we will then pass the error into this function, which will return our app error. So this one, and that is the one that will then be sent to the client using our send error prod. Okay. And so let's now actually try that. So here in our package.json, we have this start prod script. And so let's try that. So npm run start and prod, and I can actually auto-complete these npm script names using tab here in the terminal. Okay, and so this will start the process in production mode basically. Okay, and so let's now try this again. So if we now do this request, we should get back the error message that we just created, because right now we're in production. And indeed, here it is. So we have invalid and then field name, or actually the path name, and then the value that we put in. So if we try something different, then of course we get this. And of course also with our 400 bad request code. Okay, great. So this one is now handled. In the next lecture, we will then take care of the next one, which is for duplicate field names. All right, so see you then in a second.